The bullet passed so close to Pierce Fuller's ear that he could feel the wind of it, but he kept walking toward the shivering woman on the dusty street of Pioche, Nevada, because sometimes a man's instinct tells him that saving a life matters more than preserving his own. The year was 1873, and Pioche was earning its reputation as one of the roughest mining towns in the West, where more men died from violence than old age, where the earth gave up silver and the saloons gave up trouble. Pierce had ridden into town 3 days ago with nothing but his horse, his Winchester rifle, and a worn leather coat that had seen him through 5 hard winters. He worked odd jobs, broke horses, guided wagon trains, did whatever needed doing to keep moving forward. At 27 years old, he had learned that staying still meant letting the past catch up with you, and the past had teeth. The woman was crumpled against the wooden post outside the general store, her dress torn and muddy, her dark hair hanging in tangles around a face so pale it looked translucent in the late afternoon light. She was shaking violently, and Pierce could see that she wore no coat despite the October chill that had settled over the high desert. The temperature would drop below freezing once the sun went down, which would happen in less than an hour. Pierce had seen men ignore suffering before. He had done it himself when the war was still fresh and every stranger might be an enemy. But something about this woman, huddled and alone while miners and merchants walked past without a glance, struck him differently. Maybe it was the way she tried to make herself smaller, as if apologizing for taking up space in the world. Maybe it was the desperate look in her eyes when they briefly met his, a look that said she had run out of options and hope both. He shrugged off his coat as he approached, feeling the cold immediately bite through his cotton shirt. Up close, he could see that she was young, probably around 23 or 24, with delicate features that spoke of a gentler life than what Pioche typically offered. Her dress, though ruined, had once been fine quality. There was a story here, and Pierce found himself wanting to know it. "Madam," he said quietly, kneeling down so he would not loom over her, "you are going to freeze if you stay out here without something warm." She looked up at him with eyes the color of storm clouds, wide and wary. Her lips were tinged blue and her teeth chattered so hard she could barely speak. "I have no money," she managed to say. "I cannot pay you." "I am not selling it," Pierce said, and carefully draped his coat over her shoulders. The leather was warm from his body heat, and he saw her eyes close briefly as she pulled it tight around herself. "Just lending it until you get warm." For a long moment, she simply sat there, and Pierce wondered if she might cry. But when she opened her eyes again, there was a fierce kind of strength there beneath the exhaustion. "Thank you," she whispered, and the gratitude in those 2 words carried a weight that suggested she was thanking him for more than just the coat. Pierce nodded and started to stand, ready to step back and give her space, when she reached out and caught his sleeve with trembling fingers. "Please," she said, "please do not leave me here alone." There was fear in her voice, real and raw, and Pierce felt something shift in his chest. He had walked away from plenty of trouble in his life, had made an art of not getting involved in other people's problems. But this woman, with her whispered thanks and her desperate grip on his sleeve, had somehow slipped past his defenses in the space of a few heartbeats. "I will not leave you," he heard himself say, and meant it. "Can you stand?" she tried, but her legs would not hold her. Pierce caught her before she fell, and the brief contact told him that she was dangerously cold, her whole body shaking with the kind of chill that went bone deep. She needed warmth, food, and shelter, probably in that order. "The hotel is just down the street," Pierce said. "I can carry you if you cannot walk." "I told you I have no money," she said, and there was shame in her voice that made Pierce angry at whoever had put it there. "I cannot pay for a room. "I can," Pioche said, though his own funds were running low. He had planned to leave Pioche in a few days, head south before the real cold set in, but those plans suddenly seemed less important than making sure this woman survived the night. "We can worry about the details later." She looked at him for a long moment, clearly trying to decide if she could trust him. Pioche understood the calculation. A woman alone in a mining town had to be cautious, and accepting help from a strange man was a gamble that could go very wrong. But the alternative was freezing to death in the street, and they both knew it. "My name is Delilah," she said finally. "Delilah Emerson." "Pierce Fuller," he replied. "And I promise you, Miss Emerson, I mean you no harm. I just do not want to watch you freeze when I could help." Something in his tone must have convinced her, because she nodded slowly. "All right," she said. "Thank you." Pioche helped her to her feet, keeping one arm around her waist when she swayed. She was taller than he had expected, her head coming up to his shoulder, and despite her condition, he could tell she carried herself with natural grace. They made their way slowly down the street, and Pioche felt the stares of other townspeople following them. In a place like Pioche, gossip spread faster than fire, and by morning everyone would have theories about who Delilah was and what Pioche was doing with her. Let them talk, Pioche thought. He had never much cared what other people said about him. The hotel was a two-story building with a faded sign that read, "Silver Star" in peeling paint. The lobby smelled like cigar smoke and old coffee, and the man behind the desk looked up with the weary expression of someone who had seen everything and been impressed by none of it. "Need a room," Pioche said, fishing coins from his pocket. The desk clerk's eyes moved from Pioche to Delilah and back again, making assumptions Pioche did not bother to correct. $2 for the night, $3 if you want hot water for a bath." Pioche counted out $3 and accepted the key to room 7 on the second floor. Delilah had not said anything since they entered the hotel, but Pioche could feel her tension, the way she held herself rigid as they climbed the narrow stairs. She probably expected him to demand payment of a different kind now that he had spent money on her, and the thought made Pioche's jaw tighten. The room was small and spare, with a single bed, a washstand, and a window that overlooked the main street. Pioche guided Delilah to the bed and helped her sit down, then stepped back deliberately, putting distance between them. "I will go arrange for that bath," he said, "and some food. You need to get warm and eat something." Delilah looked up at him, confusion clear on her face. "You are leaving?" "Just for a few minutes," Pioche said. "To get what you need, I will come right back." "But the room," she said, gesturing vaguely. "You paid for it." "For you," Pioche clarified. "I will find somewhere else to sleep tonight. I just wanted to make sure you had a safe place." The confusion on Delilah's face deepened into something Pioche could not quite read. "I do not understand," she said quietly. "Why are you helping me?" It was a fair question, and Pioche wished he had a better answer. The truth was, he was not entirely sure himself. Something about seeing her alone and afraid had triggered an instinct he thought the war had killed, the part of him that still believed in protecting people who could not protect themselves. "Because you needed help," he said simply. "And I was there." Before Delilah could respond, Pioche left the room and headed back downstairs. He arranged for the hotel staff to bring up hot water for a bath and ordered a meal from the restaurant next door, spending money he could not really afford on a woman he had just met. His practical side told him this was foolish, that Delilah Emerson was not his responsibility, that he should walk away now before he got more involved. But something stronger than practicality kept him moving, kept him making arrangements and ignoring the knowing looks from the hotel staff. When he returned to the room carrying a tray of food, Delilah was still sitting exactly where he had left her, wrapped in his coat. She looked fragile in the fading light coming through the window, and Pierce felt that strange protective feeling surge through him again. "Food," he said, setting the tray on the small table. "Beef stew and bread. It is not fancy, but it is hot." Delilah stared at the food like she could not quite believe it was real. "You bought me dinner. You need to eat," Pierce said. "You are half frozen and probably have not had a real meal in days, judging by the look of you." He meant to sound matter-of-fact, but something in his tone made Delilah's eyes shine with unshed tears. She blinked them back quickly, but not before Pierce saw them. "I do not know how to repay you for all this kindness," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You do not need to repay me," Pierce said firmly. "Just eat the food and get warm. That is enough." They heard footsteps on the stairs, and moments later, hotel staff arrived with buckets of steaming water for the bath. Pierce supervised as they filled the tub in the corner of the room, then tipped them and waited for them to leave before turning back to Delilah. "I will go now," he said. "The bath is ready and the food is there. Lock the door after me and do not open it for anyone tonight. You will be safe here." "Where will you sleep?" Delilah asked, and Pierce was surprised by the concern in her voice. "I will find somewhere," he said with a shrug. "I have slept in worse places than a stable." "No," Delilah said suddenly, standing up. She swayed a bit, still weak, but her voice was determined. "No, you are not sleeping in a stable after everything you have done for me. This is a large enough room. You could sleep on the floor and I would take the bed, and it would be perfectly proper if we keep the door locked." Pierce started to argue, but Delilah cut him off. "Please," she said. "You have already spent your money on this room and on food. Let me at least repay you by ensuring you sleep somewhere warm tonight." There was logic to her argument, and truth be told, Pierce was exhausted. He had been working since dawn breaking horses for a local rancher, and the thought of finding another place to sleep held little appeal. More than that, he could see that having him nearby made Delilah feel safer, and after whatever she had been through, she deserved to feel safe. "All right," Pierce agreed, "but you take the bath and eat first. I will wait outside until you are done." Delilah nodded, relief crossing her face, and Pierce stepped out into the hallway. He leaned against the wall and listened to the sounds of Pioche settling into evening. Somewhere nearby, a piano played badly in a saloon. Men's voices rose and fell in argument and laughter. A woman called out, her voice shrill and commercial. This was the frontier in all its rough glory, a place where civilization and chaos fought for dominance, and chaos usually won. Nearly an hour passed before Delilah opened the door. Pierce had been starting to worry, but when he saw her, clean and dry in the dress she had washed as best she could, he understood the delay. She had needed the time to put herself back together, to reclaim some dignity after whatever had happened to her. "Thank you for waiting," she said, and gestured him inside. "The water is still warm enough if you want to wash, and I saved half the food for you." Pierce came in and locked the door behind him, then looked at the tray where Delilah had carefully divided the meal into 2 portions. His throat tightened unexpectedly. "You should eat it all," he said. "You need it more than I do." "We both need it," Delilah said firmly. "Please sit and eat with me. It is the least I can do." So Pierce sat at the small table across from Delilah, and they shared the meal in a silence that was surprisingly comfortable. Pierce tried not to stare, but he could not help noticing details now that she was clean, and the lamplight caught her features. She was beautiful in an understated way, with high cheekbones and expressive eyes that held depths of emotion. There was intelligence there, and strength that her current circumstances had not broken. "You must wonder what happened to me," Delilah said finally, setting down her spoon. "How I ended up alone in Pioche without even a coat. Only if you want to tell me, Pioche said. Your business is your own. Delilah smiled faintly. You are an unusual man, Pioche Fuller. Most would demand the story after spending their money on a stranger. I am not most people, Pioche said and meant it. No, Delilah agreed quietly. You are not. She was quiet for a moment, her fingers tracing the grain of the wooden table. When she spoke again, her voice was steady but sad. I came to Nevada from Boston 6 months ago. My father had died, and there was nothing left for me there but debts and painful memories. I had a distant cousin who wrote to say there were opportunities for women out west, that I could find work as a teacher or governess. It seemed like a chance to start over. Pioche nodded, encouraging her to continue without interrupting. The journey was difficult, but I managed. I arrived in Virginia City and found work teaching at a small school. It was not much, but it was honest work and I was happy. Then I met a man. Her voice turned bitter on the last word. His name was Thomas Crane. He was charming and well-dressed, and he told me he owned a silver mine near Pioche. He courted me properly, promised me a good life. Like a fool, I believed him. He was lying, Pioche guessed. About everything, Delilah confirmed. He convinced me to come with him to Pioche, said we would marry here and start our life together. But when we arrived 3 days ago, there was no mine. Thomas was a gambler and a thief, and he had used me as cover while running from debts in Virginia City. The men he owed found him yesterday. There was a fight and Thomas ran, leaving me behind to face them alone. Pioche felt anger kindle in his chest. Did they hurt you? They took everything I had, Delilah said. My bags, my money, even my coat. They said I could work off Thomas's debt at one of the saloons, or they could make sure I never left Pioche at all. I ran. I have been hiding for a day and a half, too afraid to ask for help, because I did not know who might be working for them. Then you came along. The simple trust in those last words hit Pioche harder than he expected. Delilah had been betrayed and threatened, left alone in one of the most dangerous towns in Nevada, and yet she had accepted his help, had trusted him when she had every reason not to trust anyone. These men who threatened you, Pioche said carefully. Do you know their names? The leader was called Marcus something. The others just did what he said. Pioche knew who she meant. Marcus Dane ran a gambling operation out of the Lucky Strike saloon, and he had a reputation for violence. Crossing him was a good way to end up in one of Pioche's many early graves. But the thought of Delilah being hunted by Dane and his men made Pioche's hands curl into fists. You are safe here tonight, Pioche said. Tomorrow we will figure out what to do next. Delilah looked at him with those storm-gray eyes, and Pioche saw hope there mixed with disbelief. Why are you doing all this? She asked again. You do not know me. You have no reason to protect me. Pioche considered the question seriously. He had asked himself the same thing multiple times since seeing her in the street. The answer was complicated, tied up in things he did not like to think about, in the people he had failed to save during the war, in the loneliness that had followed him west. But it was also simple. Because it is the right thing to do, he said finally. And because I think maybe you were meant to be on that street corner when I walked by. I do not believe in many things anymore, Miss Emerson, but I believe in following your gut when it tells you something matters. And you matter. The last 2 words hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning neither of them was quite ready to examine. Delilah's cheeks flushed, and she looked down at her hands. Thank you for coming, she whispered, and Pioche understood she meant more than just coming back to the room. She was thanking him for appearing in her life at the exact moment when she needed someone, for being the kind of man who stopped to help instead of walking past. Thank you for coming, Pioche said, knowing the words were not quite right but unable to find better ones. What he meant was, thank you for trusting me, thank you for giving me a reason to care again, Thank you for being brave enough to accept help when you needed it. All of that felt too big to put into words, so he just repeated, "Thank you for coming into my life today." Delilah lifted her eyes to meet his, and something passed between them, an understanding that went deeper than the few hours they had known each other. Pioche felt his heart, which he had thought permanently hardened, soften just a fraction. It was terrifying and exhilarating at the same time. The moment was broken by raised voices from the street below. Pioche moved to the window and looked out, his body tense. 3 men were standing outside the saloon across the way, and even from this distance, Pioche could see that one of them matched the description of Marcus Dane. They were looking up and down the street, clearly searching for something or someone. "Get away from the window," Pioche said quietly, and Delilah obeyed immediately, pressing herself against the wall. Pioche dimmed the lamp until the room was lit only by the faint glow from the street. He watched as the men conferred, then split up, 2 going one direction and Dane heading toward the hotel. "They might be looking for you," Pioche said, keeping his voice calm despite the adrenaline flooding his system. "Stay quiet." They waited in tense silence as footsteps climbed the hotel stairs. Pioche positioned himself between Delilah and the door, his hand resting on the knife at his belt. The footsteps passed their room and continued to the end of the hall, then returned. There was a pause outside their door that lasted an eternity, and Pioche saw Delilah's eyes go wide with fear. Then the footsteps moved on and descended the stairs. Pioche waited until he heard the hotel's front door open and close before moving back to the window. The 3 men were regrouping in the street, and after another brief conversation they headed back toward the saloon. Pioche let out a breath he had not realized he was holding. "They are gone for now," he said, "but they are definitely looking for you." "I should leave," Delilah said immediately. "I am putting you in danger just by being here. I cannot ask you to risk yourself for me." "You did not ask," Pioche pointed out. "I offered, and I am not letting you go back out there where Dane can find you." He turned from the window to face her, and the fear in her expression made his decision easy. "Tomorrow I will take you away from Pioche. I was planning to head south anyway. You can come with me, get far enough from here that Dane and his men cannot follow." "I cannot impose on you like that," Delilah protested. "You are not imposing," Pioche said firmly. "I am offering. There is a difference." Delilah looked like she wanted to argue further, but exhaustion was clearly winning. The fear and cold and hunger had all taken their toll, and now that she was warm and fed and relatively safe, her body was demanding rest. "We can discuss it in the morning," Pioche said, his tone gentler. "For tonight you should sleep. Take the bed, I will keep watch." "You need sleep too," Delilah said. "I will rest later," Pioche assured her. "Right now, I want to make sure no one surprises us." Delilah looked like she wanted to argue, but another wave of exhaustion crossed her face and she nodded. Pioche turned his back while she settled into the bed, giving her privacy. When he turned around again, she was lying down with his coat pulled over her like an extra blanket, her eyes already drifting closed. Pioche took up position in the chair by the window where he could watch both the door and the street. The night deepened around them, and Pioche slowly grew quieter, though it never truly slept. Pioche found his mind wandering as he kept watch, thinking about the unexpected turns life took. 24 hours ago, he had been planning his departure from Nevada, thinking only about the next job and the next town. Now he was responsible for a woman he barely knew, preparing to help her escape from dangerous men, and feeling more alive than he had in years. Somewhere around midnight, Delilah woke with a startled cry. Pioche was at her side instantly, his hand on her shoulder. "It is all right," he said softly. "You are safe. It was just a dream." Delilah looked up at him, disoriented in the darkness. "Pioche, "I am here," he confirmed. "You are safe." She relaxed slightly, but Pioche could feel her trembling. The nightmare had clearly shaken her. "I dreamed that Thomas came back," she whispered, "that he sold me to Marcus Dane." "That will not happen," Pioche said with absolute certainty. "I promise you, Delilah, no one is going to hurt you while I am here." "You cannot promise that," Delilah said, but she sounded like she wanted to believe him. "Yes, I can," Pioche said. "I have faced worse men than Marcus Dane and survived. You are under my protection now, and I do not break my promises." Delilah studied his face in the dim light filtering through the window. "You really mean that?" "Every word," Pioche confirmed. Something changed in Delilah's expression, a softening that made her look younger and more vulnerable. "Will you stay close?" she asked quietly. "Just until I fall back asleep." Pioche hesitated, aware of propriety and the risk of misunderstanding, but the need in Delilah's voice decided him. He pulled the chair over to the bedside and sat down. "I will be right here," he said. Delilah reached out and caught his hand, her fingers cold despite the warm room. Pioche let her hold on, offering what comfort he could. They stayed like that, connected in the darkness, until Delilah's breathing evened out and she drifted back to sleep. Even then, Pioche did not pull away. Something about the contact felt necessary, a reminder that neither of them was alone anymore. Dawn came slowly to Pioche, the desert sun turning the sky from black to gray to gold. Pioche had dozed in the chair for a few hours, jerking awake at every sound from the street below, but he felt surprisingly alert as morning light filled the room. Delilah was still asleep, her face peaceful now, and Pioche took a moment to simply watch her, struck by how much had changed since yesterday. He was not a man who believed in fate or divine intervention. The war had beaten such notions out of him. But he could not shake the feeling that meeting Delilah meant something, that their paths had crossed for a reason beyond simple chance. It was a dangerous thought, because it implied connection, and connection meant vulnerability. Pioche had spent years building walls to protect himself from caring too much about anything or anyone. Now those walls were showing cracks, and it scared him as much as it intrigued him. Delilah stirred and opened her eyes, taking a moment to remember where she was. When her gaze found Pioche still sitting beside the bed, still holding her hand, she smiled softly. "You stayed all night." "I said I would," Pioche replied, carefully extracting his hand from hers. The loss of contact felt wrong, but he needed distance to think clearly. "How do you feel?" "Better," Delilah said, sitting up. "Warmer and more rested than I have been in days, thanks to you." Pioche stood and moved to the window, checking the street below. Early morning in Pioche was quieter than night, with just a few people moving about their business. There was no sign of Dane or his men, but Pioche knew they would continue searching. Men like Dane did not forget debts or let potential sources of income slip away easily. "We should leave soon," Pioche said, "before the town fully wakes up. Do you have anything you need to gather before we go?" Delilah's laugh was bitter. "Everything I owned in the world was taken from me. All I have is your coat and the dress I am wearing." Pioche turned from the window and studied her. The dress had dried overnight but was stained and torn in places. She would attract attention traveling like that, and attention was the last thing they needed. "Wait here," he said. "I will be back shortly." He left before Delilah could protest, locking the door behind him. The general store was just opening when Pioche arrived, and the proprietor looked surprised to have a customer so early. Pioche quickly purchased a simple traveling dress, a warm shawl, a hat, and sturdy boots, guessing at Delilah's sizes. He also bought supplies for the trail: dried meat, hardtack, coffee, and a canteen. The purchases depleted his funds to almost nothing, but Pioche did not hesitate. Money could be earned again. Getting Delilah to safety mattered more. When he returned to the room, Delilah's eyes widened at the parcels he carried. "Pierce, what did you do?" "Got you some proper traveling clothes," Pierce said, setting the packages on the bed. "You cannot ride in a torn dress, and you will need warm things once we are up in the mountains." Delilah stared at the packages, then at Pierce, her eyes filling with tears. "You have already spent so much on me. I do not know how I will ever repay you." "Stop thinking about repayment," Pierce said, a bit more gruffly than he intended. "Just put on the clothes so we can leave before Dane and his men start their search again." Delilah nodded and gathered up the packages. Pierce stepped into the hallway to give her privacy, using the time to think through their route. They would need to retrieve his horse from the stable, then head south toward the mountains. If they pushed hard, they could be 20 miles from Pioche by nightfall, far enough that casual pursuit would give up. The real question was whether Dane cared enough to send men after them. Pierce had to assume the answer was yes. When Delilah opened the door, Pierce barely recognized her. The simple gray dress fit well, and with the shawl around her shoulders and the hat covering her distinctive dark hair, she looked like any other woman preparing for travel. But more than that, she looked stronger, less like a victim and more like someone ready to face what came next. "How do I look?" Delilah asked, and there was self-consciousness in her voice that reminded Pierce she was more than just someone he was helping. She was a woman, and despite everything else happening, she still cared about such things. "You look ready to ride," Pierce said, which was true even if it was not the compliment she might have been hoping for. "We should go." They left the hotel through the back exit, avoiding the main street. Pierce's horse was stabled 2 streets over, and he kept Delilah close as they navigated the back alleys of Pioche. The town was waking up around them, but so far, luck was holding. The stable hand was half asleep when they arrived, barely glancing at them as Pierce saddled his horse, a sturdy bay gelding named Copper. The animal was trail-wise and even-tempered, which was good because he would be carrying double for at least the first part of their journey. Pierce led Copper out of the stable and helped Delilah mount, then swung up behind her. It was intimate, sitting so close, and Pierce tried not to think about how right it felt to have her in his arms, to feel her back against his chest. He nudged Copper into a walk, heading for the southern road out of town. They were almost clear of Pioche when a shout stopped them. Pierce turned to see Marcus Dane emerging from the Lucky Strike saloon with 2 of his men. Dane pointed directly at them. "You there? That woman belongs to me." Pierce's jaw tightened. He could feel Delilah tense in front of him, fear rolling off her in waves. "Hold on tight," he told her, and urged Copper into a gallop. The horse responded instantly, powerful legs eating up the distance as they raced down the street. Behind them, Pierce heard more shouts and the sound of other horses being mounted. Dane was coming after them, and he was bringing help. The southern road climbed quickly into rocky hills dotted with sage and pinyon pine. Copper was a strong horse, but carrying 2 people would tire him faster than Pierce liked. He pushed the gelding hard for the first few miles, putting distance between them and their pursuers, then slowed to a fast trot to let the horse recover. "Are they following us?" Delilah asked, her voice tight with fear. Pierce looked back. He could see dust rising in the distance, at least 3 riders by the look of it. "Yes," he said honestly, "but we have a lead. If we can make it to the canyon pass, there are places we can hide or defend if it comes to that." "I am sorry," Delilah said miserably. "This is my fault. You should leave me and save yourself." "That is not going to happen," Pierce said firmly. "We are in this together now. Besides, I never liked Marcus Dane much anyway. Running from him is no hardship." It was a poor attempt at humor, but it earned a shaky laugh from Delilah, which was what Pioche had hoped for. Fear could paralyze if you let it, and right now they needed to keep moving and thinking clearly. They rode hard for another hour, climbing higher into the mountains. The October air was thin and cold this high up, and Pioche was glad he had bought Delilah the warm shawl. Behind them, their pursuers were gaining ground slowly but steadily. Fresh horses against one tired gelding carrying two people. The math was not in their favor. Pioche's mind raced through options. The canyon pass was still 2 hours ahead at their current pace. They needed either a place to hide or a way to slow down their pursuers, preferably both. Then he spotted it, a narrow side trail leading up into the rocks, barely visible from the main path. It was steep and dangerous, the kind of route that most riders would avoid, but it led to a series of caves Pioche had used as shelter once before. If they could reach the caves before being spotted, they might be able to lose their pursuers. "There is going to be some rough riding," Pioche warned Delilah. "Trust Copper and stay low." He turned the horse onto the side trail, and Copper climbed gamely, his hooves finding purchase on loose rock and hard-packed dirt. The trail wound upward through a maze of boulders, and Pioche prayed they would not run into a dead end. Behind them, he could hear the main pursuit riding past on the southern road, not noticing the side trail. The trail leveled out suddenly, opening onto a small plateau dotted with caves. Pioche guided Copper into the largest cave, which went back deep enough to hide a horse and two people. The entrance was partially obscured by a rock fall, making it difficult to spot unless you knew it was there. They dismounted, and Pioche quickly led Copper to the back of the cave where the shadows were deepest. Delilah pressed close to him, breathing hard from fear and exertion. Pioche put a finger to his lips, signaling for silence, and they waited. Minutes passed like hours. Then Pioche heard it, hoofbeats returning down the southern road. The riders had realized their quarry was no longer ahead of them and were backtracking. Pioche held his breath as the sounds came closer. Through the cave opening, he could see two riders pass by on the main trail, their heads turning as they searched. "They could not have just disappeared," one of them said, frustrated. It was not Dane's voice. "Maybe they headed off trail," the other replied. "In these rocks." "That would be suicide on a tired horse." Dane said to find them. "We should split up, search the side canyons." Pioche's hand moved to his rifle, ready if they were discovered. But after another moment of discussion, the riders continued down the main trail, apparently deciding that searching every side path would take too long. Pioche waited until the sound of hoofbeats faded completely before relaxing slightly. "We are not safe yet," he whispered to Delilah. "But we bought ourselves some time." Delilah nodded, still pressed against his side. In the dimness of the cave, Pioche could see how frightened she was, how much trust she was placing in him. The weight of that trust was heavy, but it was also something he had not realized he needed. For years, Pioche had drifted through life with no real connections, no one depending on him or caring whether he lived or died. The loneliness of that existence had become so normal he had stopped noticing it. But now, with Delilah's hand gripping his arm and her safety depending on his choices, Pioche felt tethered to life in a way he had not been since before the war. They stayed in the cave for several hours, waiting for full darkness. Pioche used the time to rest Copper and ration out some of the food he had purchased. They ate in silence, both too aware of their precarious situation to make conversation. But it was a comfortable silence, born of shared danger and growing trust. As twilight fell, Pioche studied Delilah in the failing light. She had been through so much in the past few days, betrayed and threatened and forced to run for her life. Yet there was no self-pity in her expression, only determination. She was stronger than her delicate appearance suggested, and Pioche found himself deeply impressed by her resilience. "What are you thinking?" Delilah asked, catching him watching her. "That you are braver than most men I have known," Pioche said honestly. "A lot of people would have fallen apart by now." Delilah smiled faintly. "I am terrified. I am just good at hiding it." "Bravery is not the absence of fear," Pioche said. "It is doing what needs to be done despite being afraid. That makes you brave." "I am only able to keep going because you are here," Delilah said quietly. "If I were alone, I think I would have given up." "But you are not alone," Pioche reminded her, "and you will not be as long as I have anything to say about it." The words hung between them, a promise that went beyond just escaping Pioche. Pioche saw understanding dawn in Delilah's eyes, the realization that something significant was forming between them, something neither of them had been looking for but both were starting to need. "Pioche," Delilah said hesitantly, "when we get away from here, when we are safe, what happens then?" It was a good question, one Pioche had been avoiding thinking about. "I suppose that depends on what you want," he said carefully. "Where were you planning to go before Thomas brought you to Pioche?" "I had no real plans beyond finding work as a teacher," Delilah admitted. "I have no family left, no home waiting for me anywhere. I was just trying to survive and start over." "There are towns south of here that need teachers," Pioche said. "Small places, safer than Pioche. I could take you to one of them, help you get settled." "And then," Delilah asked, "would you just ride away and leave me there?" The thought of leaving Delilah, even in a safe town with a good job, made Pioche's chest tighten painfully. Somewhere in the past 24 hours, she had become important to him in a way he had not anticipated. The idea of saying goodbye and riding off alone suddenly seemed unbearable. "I do not know," Pioche admitted. "Part of me wants to make sure you are settled and safe before I move on, but another part of me does not want to move on at all." Delilah's breath caught. "What are you saying?" Pioche struggled to put his feelings into words. He was not good at this, at exposing his emotions and making himself vulnerable. But Delilah deserved honesty, especially after everything he had asked her to trust him with. "I am saying that meeting you has changed something for me," Pioche said slowly. "I have spent years drifting, not connecting with anyone or anything. It felt safer that way, like I could not be hurt if I did not care. But then I saw you yesterday, shivering and alone, and something in me just knew I could not walk away. And now, after spending this time with you, after seeing your strength and your kindness even in the worst circumstances, I find myself not wanting to walk away at all." "Pioche," Delilah whispered, and there was wonder in her voice. "I feel the same way. It is too fast, too soon, it does not make any logical sense, but when I look at you, I feel safe and seen in a way I have never felt before. You barely know me, yet you have risked everything to protect me. How could I not care about someone like that?" They were sitting close in the darkness, and Pioche felt himself leaning toward her, drawn by something stronger than common sense. Delilah met him halfway, and when their lips touched, it felt like coming home after a long absence. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, both of them testing this new connection. Then Delilah's hand came up to cup Pioche's face, and the kiss deepened, becoming something that spoke of need and hope and the beginning of love. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing hard. "We should not have done that," Pioche said, though he did not sound convinced. "Probably not," Delilah agreed, but she was smiling. "But I am glad we did." Pioche smiled back, feeling lighter than he had in years. "When we are safe, when this is all over, I want to court you properly. Do things right." "I would like that," Delilah said softly. "But Pioche, you should know that I do not need proper courtship or fancy gestures. You gave me your coat when I was freezing. You protected me when I had no one. You have shown me more genuine care in 2 days than Thomas did in months of pretty words. That is what matters to me." Pierce felt something crack open in his chest, a place he had kept carefully guarded for so long. Delilah saw him, really saw him, in a way no one had in years. Not as a drifter or a gun hand or a man running from his past, but as someone worth caring about. "We should rest," Pierce said, his voice rough with emotion. "We will need to move again before dawn." They settled down in the cave, Delilah wrapped in Pierce's coat and Pierce keeping watch. But this time, Delilah fell asleep with her head resting against Pierce's shoulder, and Pierce let himself hold her, marveling at how natural it felt. The next few days were a test of endurance and will. Pierce and Delilah traveled mostly at night, hiding during the day and moving through the mountains on paths that would be difficult to follow. Twice they saw signs of pursuit, riders searching for them, but they stayed ahead and out of sight. Copper proved his worth again and again, carrying them over rough terrain without complaint. As they traveled, Pierce and Delilah talked, sharing pieces of their lives in the long hours of darkness. Pierce told her about the war, about the things he had seen and done that still haunted him. He had never spoken of it so openly before, but Delilah listened without judgment, her presence somehow making it easier to face his demons. Delilah, in turn, told him about her childhood in Boston, about her father who had been a professor of literature and her mother who had died when Delilah was young. She spoke of her love for teaching, for sharing knowledge and watching young minds grow. Pierce could hear the passion in her voice when she talked about books and learning, and he found himself fascinated by her intelligence and curiosity. On the fourth day, they reached a small town called Silver Springs, tucked into a valley surrounded by mountains. It was remote enough that Marcus Dane would be unlikely to follow, and big enough to have a school and proper homes. Pierce felt both relief and sadness as they rode into town. Relief that Delilah would be safe here, sadness that their journey together was ending. They found lodging at a small boarding house run by a widow named Mrs. Chen, who took one look at Delilah's exhausted face and immediately offered her a room and a hot meal. Over dinner, they learned that Silver Springs' previous schoolteacher had recently married and moved away, and the town was desperate for someone to take over the school. "It is perfect," Delilah said later, when she and Pierce were alone in the boarding house parlor. "Like it was meant to be." "You will do well here," Pierce agreed. "They need someone like you." "What about you?" Delilah asked. "What will you do?" Pierce had been wrestling with that question since they arrived. The sensible thing would be to stay a few days to make sure Delilah was settled, then move on as he had originally planned. But the thought of leaving her, of going back to his solitary drifting, felt wrong now. "I was thinking I might stay around for a while," Pierce said carefully. "Silver Springs could probably use a decent stable hand or ranch worker, and I want to make sure you are truly safe before I go anywhere." Delilah's face lit up with a smile that made Pierce's heart skip. "You would stay, here, for a while at least," Pierce confirmed. "If that is all right with you." "It is more than all right," Delilah said, reaching for his hand. "It is everything I have been hoping for but was afraid to ask." They sat together in the quiet parlor, hands intertwined, and Pierce felt something settle inside him. For the first time in years, he was not running from his past or toward an uncertain future. He was simply here, in this moment, with this woman who had somehow become essential to him in less than a week. The next weeks passed in a kind of wonderful routine. Delilah took over the school, and Pierce found work at a nearby ranch breaking horses and mending fences. In the evenings, they would meet at the boarding house for dinner or take walks through the town, and Silver Springs began to feel like home in a way nowhere had since before the war. Pioche courted Delilah properly as he had promised, with small gestures that spoke louder than grand pronouncements. He brought her wildflowers picked from the mountain meadows. He fixed the broken window in her schoolhouse. He sat patiently while she read aloud from her favorite books, learning to appreciate poetry and literature through her eyes. Delilah, for her part, drew Pioche out of his shell in ways he had not thought possible. She made him laugh with her dry observations about town life. She listened to his stories about the places he had traveled. She gently challenged his darker views, showing him that the world still held beauty and goodness if you knew where to look. The town accepted them as a couple with surprising ease. Mrs. Chen became a friendly chaperone, making sure propriety was observed while also giving them space to be together. The ranch owner, a gruff man named Mr. Patterson, took a liking to Pioche and began teaching him the business side of ranching. The schoolchildren adored Delilah, and Pioche often found himself helping build school projects or teaching the older boys about horses. 3 months after arriving in Silver Springs, on a cold January evening, Pioche took Delilah to a spot overlooking the valley. The sun was setting, painting the snow-covered peaks in shades of gold and pink. They stood together, wrapped in warm coats, watching the light fade. "Delilah," Pioche said, his heart pounding harder than it had facing down Marcus Dane's men, "I need to ask you something." Delilah turned to him, her gray eyes reflecting the sunset. "What is it?" Pioche reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple gold band. He had traded a month's wages for it, and it was the most precious thing he owned. "I know we have not known each other long by normal standards. And I know I am not much of a catch, just a drifter who is trying to settle down. But these past months with you have been the happiest of my life. You make me want to be better, to build something lasting instead of always moving on. So I am asking, Delilah Emerson, would you consider marrying me?" Delilah's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Yes, Pioche Fuller, I will marry you. You are not just a drifter. You are the man who gave me his coat when I was freezing. You are the man who protected me when I had nothing. You are the man who showed me that kindness and strength can exist in the same person. Of course, I will marry you." Pioche slipped the ring onto her finger with shaking hands, then pulled her close and kissed her as the sun disappeared behind the mountains. It was a beginning, a promise of a future together, and it felt more right than anything Pioche had ever done. They were married in March, when spring was just starting to touch the valley with green. It was a small ceremony at the Silver Springs Church, with most of the town in attendance. Mrs. Chen wept happy tears. Mr. Patterson stood as Pioche's witness, grumbling about losing his best horse breaker to domestic life, but smiling the whole time. The schoolchildren sang, slightly off-key but with great enthusiasm. Delilah wore a simple white dress that Mrs. Chen had helped her sew, and she carried wildflowers that would not bloom for another month, made instead from colored paper by her students. Pioche wore his best clothes, which were not much, but Delilah told him he was the handsomest man she had ever seen, and the way she looked at him made him believe it. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Pioche kissed his bride in front of God and the whole town, and felt like the luckiest man alive. This woman, who had come into his life as a stranger shivering in the street, was now his wife, his partner, his home. Mr. Patterson gave them a small house on the ranch property as a wedding gift, saying he needed his best worker close by. It was a simple place, just 3 rooms and a front porch, but it was theirs. Pioche and Delilah spent their first months of marriage turning it into a home, hanging curtains and planting a garden and filling the rooms with laughter and love. The work was hard but satisfying. Pioche took on more responsibility at the ranch, and Mr. Patterson began talking about making him a partner someday. Delilah continued teaching, inspiring her students and becoming a beloved figure in Silver Springs. They were building a life together, solid and real, rooted in the valley that had given them shelter. One evening in June, nearly a year after they first met, Delilah had news. Pioche came home from the ranch to find her standing on the porch, her face glowing with a mixture of excitement and nervousness. "What is it?" Pioche asked, concerned by her expression. "I saw the doctor today," Delilah said. "Pioche, I am with child. We are going to have a baby." Pioche felt the world tilt in the best possible way. A baby. A child of his own. He had never let himself imagine such a thing, had never thought he deserved the kind of happiness that came with family. But Delilah was looking at him with such hope and love, and Pioche realized he wanted this more than he had wanted anything. "That is wonderful," he said, sweeping her into his arms. "That is the best news I have ever heard." "Are you sure?" Delilah asked. "It will change everything." No more quiet evenings, no more spontaneous plans, just diapers and crying and chaos. "I am sure," Pioche said firmly. "I want this, Delilah. I want a family with you. I want to build something that lasts, something good. This child will be loved and protected and given every opportunity we can provide." Delilah's eyes shone with tears. "I love you, Pioche Fuller." "I love you too," Pioche replied, and knew it was the truest thing he had ever said. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the summer and into fall. Delilah continued teaching until her growing belly made it difficult, then reluctantly handed the school over to a temporary replacement. Pioche became almost comically protective, worrying about everything from her diet to whether she was getting enough rest. Delilah tolerated his fussing with good-natured patience, occasionally reminding him that women had been having babies since the beginning of time. In December, exactly a year and a month after Pioche had first seen Delilah shivering in the streets of Pioche, their son was born. It was a difficult labor that lasted through the night, and Pioche paced outside their bedroom like a caged animal, terrified for his wife and child. But when the doctor finally called him in, Delilah was sitting up in bed, exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets. "Meet your son," she said softly, and placed the baby in Pioche's arms. Pioche looked down at the tiny face, the miniature fingers curled into fists, and felt his heart expand in ways he had not known were possible. This was his son, his child, a piece of himself and Delilah made real. The baby opened his eyes, dark blue like his mother's, and Pioche felt tears he did not bother to hide roll down his cheeks. "He is perfect," Pioche whispered. "Absolutely perfect." "What should we name him?" Delilah asked. They had discussed names for months without settling on one. But now, holding his son, Pioche knew exactly what felt right. "Benjamin," he said. "After my father, Benjamin Fuller." Delilah smiled. "Benjamin, I love it. Welcome to the world, Benjamin." The first year of Benjamin's life was exhausting and magical in equal measure. Pioche discovered that babies required far more care than the horses he was used to working with, and much less sleep than any human should be expected to function on. But he also discovered the fierce protective love that fatherhood brought, and the incredible joy in watching his son grow and change every day. Delilah returned to teaching when Benjamin was 6 months old, and Pioche adjusted his ranch schedule so he could care for their son during school hours. The other ranch hands found it amusing to see their tough horse Breaker walking around with a baby strapped to his chest, but Pioche did not care. Every coo and giggle from Benjamin made the teasing worthwhile. Silver Springs continued to be good to them. The town thrived as more families moved in, drawn by the promise of silver in the mountains and good farmland in the valley. Pioche and Delilah became pillars of the community, the kind of couple that others looked to for stability and wisdom. It was a role Pioche had never imagined himself filling, but with Delilah beside him, it felt natural. They had been married 3 years when Delilah became pregnant again. This time Pioche was less terrified and more excited, though he still fussed over her constantly. Their daughter, Alice, was born in the spring during a thunderstorm, and she came into the world screaming her displeasure at the noise. She had her father's dark hair and her mother's determination, and from the very beginning it was clear she would be a force to reckon with. Benjamin, now a curious 3-year-old, was fascinated by his baby sister. He would sit beside her cradle for hours, telling her stories in his limited vocabulary and bringing her his favorite toys. Pioche would watch his children together and feel overwhelmed by gratitude for the life he had built. The ranch continued to prosper, and true to his word, Mr. Patterson made Pioche a partner in the business. It meant more responsibility and harder work, but it also meant security for Pioche's family. He and Delilah were able to expand their small house, adding 2 more rooms and a proper kitchen. The garden Delilah had planted grew each year, providing vegetables and herbs and a riot of flowers that made their home beautiful. 5 years into their marriage, Pioche and Delilah took their children on a trip to Virginia City. It was partly business, Pioche needing to negotiate horse sales, but also a kind of pilgrimage. Virginia City was where Delilah's western journey had truly begun, before Thomas Crane had brought her to Pioche and nearly destroyed her life. Walking through the town with his family, Pioche thought about how different things might have been if he had walked past Delilah that day in Pioche. If he had not stopped to help, if she had not trusted him enough to accept his coat and his protection. Their entire life together rested on that one moment of connection, that choice to help a stranger in need. "What are you thinking about?" Delilah asked, taking his hand as they watched Benjamin and Alice explore a shop window. "Just how lucky I am," Pioche said honestly. "How everything in my life led to that moment when I saw you shivering in the street. How I almost did not stop. How easily we might have missed each other." Delilah squeezed his hand. "But you did stop. You gave me your coat, and when I thanked you, you said those words I will never forget." "Thank you for coming," Pioche quoted, remembering. "I meant it, you know. Thank you for coming into my life, for trusting me, for building this future with me." "Thank you for saving me," Delilah replied. "Not just from the cold or from Marcus Dane, but from loneliness and despair. You gave me hope when I had none, and love when I thought I would never find it." They stood together on the Virginia City street, their children playing nearby, and Pioche felt the full weight of his happiness. He had spent so many years running from his past, convinced he did not deserve peace or love or a family. But Delilah had seen something worth saving in him, and in saving each other, they had built something extraordinary. The years continued to pass, marked by the growth of their children and the deepening of their love. Benjamin grew into a thoughtful boy who loved books as much as his mother and horses as much as his father. Alice was wild and brave, always getting into trouble and always finding her way out with a combination of charm and stubbornness. Pioche and Delilah raised them with firm love, teaching them the values of kindness, hard work, and integrity. When Benjamin was 10 and Alice was 7, Delilah became pregnant again, a surprise that left both her and Pioche shocked and delighted. Their third child, a boy they named Samuel, arrived in early winter. He was a calm baby, content to watch the world with serious eyes, and he completed their family in a way Pioche had not known they needed. The ranch continued to grow under Pioche's partnership with Mr. Patterson. When the older man died peacefully in his sleep at age 72, he left his share of the ranch to Pioche, making him the sole owner. It was both a blessing and a responsibility, but Pioche was ready for it. He had learned that he was capable of far more than he had ever given himself credit for, and with Delilah's support, he felt he could handle anything. Their 20th wedding anniversary arrived on a beautiful March day. Pioche had planned a surprise for Delilah, something he had been working on for months. He took her to a piece of land he had purchased on the edge of Silver Springs, where a new building stood waiting. "What is this?" Delilah asked, confused. "It is a library," Pioche explained. "For the town. I have watched you building your collection of books for 20 years, and I know how much you love sharing them with your students. But Silver Springs has grown, and more children need access to books. So I built this. It is yours to run, to fill with whatever books you think the town needs. Consider it my anniversary gift." Delilah stared at the building, then at Pioche, tears streaming down her face. "You built me a library." "I built the town a library," Pioche corrected gently. "But yes, I did it for you. Because you taught me to love reading, to see the value in education and knowledge. This is my way of saying thank you for expanding my world." Delilah threw her arms around him, and Pioche held her close, breathing in the familiar scent of her hair. 2 decades together, and she still had the power to make his heart race. They had weathered storms and celebrated triumphs, raised children and built a community, and through it all, their love had only grown stronger. The library became a center of Silver Springs life, just as Pioche had hoped. Delilah filled it with books purchased from dealers across the West, creating a collection that served everyone from young children to scholarly adults. She organized reading groups and tutored struggling students, and made the library a welcoming place for anyone seeking knowledge or simply a quiet moment. Pioche continued to run the ranch, but he also became more involved in town governance, serving as mayor for 2 terms and helping guide Silver Springs through a period of rapid growth and change. He brought the same steady reliability to public service that he brought to everything else, earning the respect and trust of the community. Their children grew into remarkable adults. Benjamin went to university in California to study law, then returned to Silver Springs to open a practice serving the surrounding area. He married a sweet-natured woman named Clara and gave Pioche and Delilah their first grandchildren, twin girls who looked exactly like their grandmother. Alice, true to her adventurous nature, became a journalist, writing for newspapers across Nevada and reporting on the changing face of the West. She never married, claiming she was too busy seeing the world, but she visited home frequently and filled the house with stories of her adventures. Samuel followed his father's path, working the ranch and eventually taking over day-to-day operations as Pioche aged. He had his father's quiet strength and his mother's kind heart, and he proved more than capable of carrying on the Fuller legacy. On their 30th anniversary, Pioche and Delilah sat on the porch of their expanded home, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of fire. They were both graying now, lines of age marking faces that had known both hardship and joy. But they sat close together, still holding hands after 3 decades, still finding comfort in each other's presence. "You ever think about that day in Pioche?" Delilah asked. "All the time," Pioche admitted. "I think about how close I came to not stopping, to just walking past you like everyone else did. It terrifies me sometimes, how easily I might have missed the best thing that ever happened to me." "But you did not walk past," Delilah reminded him. "You stopped. You gave me your coat. You saved my life, Pioche, in every way a person can be saved." "You saved mine too," Pioche said. "I was so lost before I met you, so convinced that I did not deserve happiness or love. You showed me that I was wrong, that I could be more than just a drifter running from his past." Delilah leaned her head against his shoulder. We saved each other. That is what love does. It saves us from the worst parts of ourselves and shows us the best parts we did not know existed. They sat in comfortable silence as the sun disappeared and stars began to emerge in the darkening sky. Somewhere in the house, they could hear Samuel and his wife preparing dinner, the sounds of family and home and love. Pioche thought about the long road that had led him to this porch, to this woman, to this life. Every hardship, every loss, every moment of despair had been worth it because it had led him to Delilah. The decades continued to pass, marked by grandchildren and great-grandchildren, by the slow turning of seasons and the steady growth of Silver Springs into a prosperous town. Pioche and Delilah grew old together, their bodies slowing but their love remaining constant. They took daily walks through town, greeted by people they had known for decades, living testaments to the power of commitment and care. On a quiet morning in their 52nd year of marriage, Pioche woke to find Delilah still sleeping beside him. They were both in their 70s now, each day a gift they did not take for granted. He studied her face in the morning light, still beautiful to him despite the wrinkles and gray hair. This was the woman who had changed everything, who had taken a chance on a rough cowboy and transformed him into a husband, father, grandfather, and pillar of the community. Delilah's eyes opened, and she smiled at him with the same warmth she had shown that first night in the Pioche hotel room. "Good morning," she said softly. "Good morning," Pioche replied, leaning over to kiss her forehead. "I love you." "I love you too," Delilah said. "I always have from that very first moment when you gave me your coat." "Thank you for accepting it," Pioche said. "Thank you for trusting me." "Thank you for being trustworthy," Delilah replied. "Thank you for building this beautiful life with me." They rose slowly and dressed, preparing for another day in the life they had built together. Benjamin and his family were coming for Sunday dinner, and Alice was returning from San Francisco with stories from her latest assignment. Samuel would bring his 3 children by after church. The house would be full of noise and laughter and love, exactly as Pioche had always wanted but never thought he would have. As he helped Delilah with her shawl, Pioche caught sight of his old leather coat hanging on a peg by the door. It was worn thin now, patched in several places, but Delilah had insisted on keeping it all these years. "Our beginning," she always said when he suggested retiring it. "The moment when everything changed." Pioche touched the old leather gently, remembering the cold October day when he had draped it over the shoulders of a shivering stranger. He remembered her whispered thank you, barely audible over the sound of the Pioche wind. He remembered his own response, those words that had not quite fit but had somehow been exactly right. "Thank you for coming. Thank you for coming into my life, into my heart, into my future. Thank you for seeing past my rough exterior to the man I could be. Thank you for choosing to trust a stranger on the worst day of your life. Thank you for building this family, this home, this love that has sustained me for more than half a century." The words had been clumsy when he first spoke them, uncertain and inadequate. But looking back across 52 years of marriage, 3 children, 7 grandchildren, and 4 great-grandchildren, Pioche understood that they had been a promise. A vow to be worthy of the trust Delilah had placed in him, to protect and cherish her, to build something lasting and good from that single moment of connection on a dusty Nevada street. Later that day, surrounded by family in the home they had built together, Pioche caught Delilah's eye across the crowded room. She smiled at him, that special smile reserved only for him, and Pioche felt his heart swell with gratitude. This was his life, earned not through luck but through the choice to stop and help when it would have been easier to walk away. Through Delilah's courage in accepting help when she had every reason to be afraid. through their mutual commitment to building something real and lasting from the most fragile of beginnings. As the afternoon light slanted through the windows and his family laughed and talked around him, Pierce silently repeated those words one more time. Thank you for coming. Thank you for trusting me. Thank you for loving me. Thank you for this beautiful, impossible, perfect life. And though she was across the room helping her great-granddaughter with a stubborn puzzle piece, Pierce knew somehow that Delilah heard him. Because after 52 years together, they did not always need words to communicate. The love between them had become a language all its own, spoken in glances and touches, and the simple comfort of shared presence. That evening, after the family had gone home and the house was quiet again, Pierce and Delilah returned to their porch, their favorite spot for watching the world go by. The Nevada sky was clear and vast above them, filled with more stars than seemed possible. Pierce held his wife's hand and thought about time, how it passes so quickly, and yet how each moment holds the potential for transformation. "What are you thinking about?" Delilah asked, as she had so many times over their decades together. "I am thinking about how one moment can change everything," Pierce said. "How if I had walked down a different street in Pioche that day, or if you had been sitting somewhere else, or if I had decided not to stop, our entire lives would be different. All these years, all these memories, all this love, it all came from one simple act of kindness." "It was not just kindness," Delilah said thoughtfully. "It was recognition. Something in you recognized something in me and vice versa. We were meant to find each other, Pierce. I truly believe that." "Maybe we were," Pierce agreed. "Or maybe we just got very lucky. Either way, I am grateful for every day I have had with you. Even the hard days," Delilah teased gently. "The times when the children were impossible or the ranch was struggling or we could barely afford to feed ourselves." "Especially those days," Pierce said seriously. "Because we faced them together. Because you showed me that I was strong enough to weather any storm as long as you were beside me." Delilah leaned against him, and they sat in peaceful silence as the night deepened around them. 52 years of marriage, and Pierce could honestly say he loved her more now than he had even on their wedding day. That first love had been intense but uncertain, built on hope and attraction, and the desperate need to believe in something good. This love was deep and sure, built on decades of shared experiences, on knowing someone completely and choosing them again every single day. The months that followed were gentle and sweet, filled with the quiet pleasures of a life well lived. Pierce worked less at the ranch, content to let Samuel run things while he took on an advisory role. Delilah still spent time at the library several days a week, though she too had stepped back from daily management. They took walks, they read together, they played with their great-grandchildren, and they cherished every ordinary moment. On the morning of what would have been their 53rd anniversary, Pierce woke to find Delilah had passed peacefully in her sleep. The doctor said her heart had simply stopped, a gentle ending for a gentle soul. Pierce sat beside her for a long time, holding her hand and saying goodbye to the woman who had been his everything for more than half his life. The grief was crushing, but it was also suffused with gratitude. They had been blessed with 52 years together, far more than many couples received. They had built a life of meaning and love, had raised children who were good people, had contributed to their community in lasting ways. Delilah had died surrounded by people who loved her, in a home filled with happy memories. If there was such a thing as a good death, she had achieved it. The funeral was attended by seemingly everyone in Silver Springs and many from surrounding towns. Person after person came forward to share stories of how Delilah had touched their lives, had taught them to read or encouraged their dreams, or simply shown them kindness when they needed it most. Pioche listened to them all, understanding for perhaps the first time just how many lives had been changed by that one act of stopping to help a shivering stranger. Because, if Pioche had not given Delilah his coat that day, none of these people would have been taught by her. The library would not exist. Their children and grandchildren would never have been born. The ripples from that single moment of compassion had spread outward in ways Pioche could never have imagined, touching countless lives in lasting ways. Pioche lived another 5 years after Delilah's death, staying in their home surrounded by memories and family. His children and grandchildren visited regularly, making sure he was never alone for long. He spent his final years writing down the story of his life with Delilah, wanting future generations to know how their family had begun. He wanted them to understand that love could be found in the most unexpected places, that kindness mattered, that one moment of choosing to care could change everything. On a cold March morning, exactly 58 years after he had first met Delilah in Pioche, Pioche passed away quietly in his sleep. He was buried beside his wife on a hillside overlooking Silver Springs, their matching headstones bearing the dates of their long lives and a simple inscription, "Thank you for coming." The town erected a statue in their honor, depicting a man draping a coat over a woman's shoulders, immortalizing the moment that had started it all. Under the statue, a plaque told their story, how Pierce Fuller had stopped to help a stranger named Delilah Emerson and had found love that lasted a lifetime. It became a symbol for Silver Springs, a reminder that compassion and courage could create something beautiful and lasting. Their children carried on their legacy. Benjamin's law practice continued to serve the community. Alice's journalistic work documenting the changing West became historically significant. Samuel's management of the ranch kept it prosperous for generations. The library Delilah had loved continued to serve the town, eventually being officially renamed the Delilah Fuller Memorial Library. And on quiet evenings, when the families gathered at the old Fuller house, now maintained as a family retreat, someone would always tell the story again. The story of the cowboy who gave his coat to a shivering stranger. The story of the woman who whispered thank you. The story of the man who said thank you for coming and meant it with his whole heart. The story of a love that began with compassion and grew into something that changed not just 2 lives, but an entire community and all the generations that followed. It was a reminder that we never know when the most important moment of our lives will arrive. That sometimes it comes disguised as a stranger in need on a dusty street. That the choice to stop and help, even when it is inconvenient or costly or frightening, can lead to blessings beyond imagining. Pioche and Delilah's story became the kind that parents told children, that grandparents shared with grandchildren. A tale that was both specific to one couple and universal in its message. It was about love, yes, but it was also about courage and kindness and the extraordinary things that can grow from the simplest acts of human decency. And sometimes, on March evenings when the wind blows just right through Silver Springs, old-timers swear they can see 2 figures walking hand in hand down the main street, an older couple who have clearly spent a lifetime together. The man tall and steady, the woman graceful and bright, both of them at peace, both of them home. The story of Pioche and Delilah Fuller lived on, a testament to the power of compassion, the importance of trust, and the incredible things that can happen when one person chooses to help another. It reminded everyone who heard it that love can be found in the most unexpected places, that true partnership is built on mutual respect and care, and that the smallest act of kindness can ripple outward through time in ways we can never fully predict or understand. Their great-great-grandchildren still visit Silver Springs, still walk past the statue, still feel the presence of the love story that began it all. They carry forward the values Pioche and Delilah embodied, the belief in helping others, in building community, in choosing love even when it would be easier to walk away. The old leather coat, carefully preserved, sits in a display case at the library, a tangible reminder of where it all began. Visitors come to see it and read the story, and many leave with tears in their eyes, moved by the simple beauty of two people who found each other at exactly the right moment and built a love that lasted not just a lifetime, but generations. In the end, Pierce Fuller's life was defined not by the battles he had fought or the hardships he had endured, but by the single choice to stop and help a stranger in need. That choice led him to Delilah, to love, to family, to a life of meaning and purpose that exceeded anything he could have imagined during his wandering years. And Delilah Emerson Fuller's legacy was not just the library that bore her name or the students she had taught, but the courage she had shown in trusting a stranger with her safety, in believing that kindness still existed in a harsh world, in building a life of love and service despite the betrayals that had brought her to Pioche. Together, they proved that love stories do not always begin with grand gestures or perfect circumstances. Sometimes they begin with a simple act of compassion on a cold October day. Sometimes they begin with a whispered thank you and an awkward but heartfelt response. Sometimes the greatest romances start not with love at first sight, but with the choice to see another person's need and respond with kindness. Their story lived on in Silver Springs and beyond, a beacon of hope for anyone who had ever felt lost or alone or beyond help. It reminded people that rescue can come from unexpected sources, that strangers can become soulmates, and that love, real and lasting love, is built not on perfection, but on consistent choosing of one another through all of life's challenges and joys. The town of Silver Springs thrived for generations, always remembering the couple who had helped shape its character and values. And though Pierce and Delilah were long gone, their love story remained alive in every act of kindness, every helping hand extended to a stranger, every choice to see the humanity in another person and respond with compassion. It was a legacy worth leaving, a story worth telling, a love worth celebrating. And it all began with a cowboy who gave his coat to a shivering stranger, a woman who whispered thank you, and a man who said thank you for coming and found in those simple words the beginning of everything that mattered.